Ancient Egypt was thousands of years in the making, a civilization that created the world's first nation-state, invented writing, and built monuments that still stand today. The pyramids, temples, and golden treasures we recognize instantly, yet the true story of these people remains completely misunderstood. Here's what life was really like in the world's greatest civilization. Before the story, if these help you sleep, like or subscribe would be cool. Also drop where you're listening from and the time. I check the comments and it's crazy seeing people from like Australia and Norway on the same video. Alright, tonight it's ancient Egypt. But before we go anywhere, get cozy, like actually cozy. Pillows good? Blanket situation handled? Perfect. Trust me on this one. You open your eyes to darkness, complete, total darkness, not the kind you're used to, with streetlights leaking through your blinds or the soft glow of electronics. This is proper darkness. It's 19,000 years ago, and you're waking up on the hard ground of a shallow cave in what will someday be southern Egypt. Your body aches. Every inch of you feels the unforgiving rock beneath your thin animal hide. The air smells of smoke from last night's fire, your only protection against the predators that roam the savanna grasslands. Your mouth is dry, your stomach tight with hunger. This isn't a bad night's sleep. This is just sleep for the earliest inhabitants of Egypt. You hear movement outside as the hunters prepare for the day. You're one of them, a nomadic hunter who follows the great herds of wild cattle across this surprisingly green landscape. Yeah, green. This isn't the Egypt you picture with endless deserts and pyramids. Not yet. The climate is completely different. Wetter, greener, with seasonal rains that create lakes and support grasslands filled with animals. "Wake up," someone whispers, nudging your shoulder. "The oryx are moving. We need to follow. The aurochs, massive wild cattle, are the lifeblood of your people. They provide meat, hide, bone for tools. Track them, kill them, or starve. It's that simple." You emerge from the cave into the pre-dawn light. The sky is transitioning from black to deep blue, stars still visible. Unlike your warm bed at home with its reliable roof, here the elements rule your existence. The morning chill bites at your skin, your breath visible in small clouds. "Look!" Your hunting companion points to tracks in the soft earth. Fresh, from before sunrise. This is what survival looks like, reading the smallest signs in nature that most modern humans have forgotten how to see. You can tell from these tracks not just that oryx passed by, but how many, how fast they were moving, and roughly how long ago. Your small band of about 20 people quickly breaks camp. There's no time for breakfast. Eating happens after a successful hunt, not before. Your stomach will have to wait. Unlike you lying in your comfortable bed right now, these early Egyptians didn't have the luxury of regular meals. "We should check the high ground," you suggest, pointing to a rocky outcrop. "See which way the herd is moving." Side note, I spent weeks researching these early hunter-gatherers of pre-dynastic Egypt, and the most fascinating thing is how skilled they were at reading landscapes. They knew exactly which plants signaled water nearby, which animal behaviors predicted weather changes. Their survival depended on observation skills we've completely lost. From the high rock, you can see for miles across the savannah, and there they are, a herd of oryx, maybe 40 animals grazing peacefully about a mile away. Their massive curved horns catch the early morning light. "If we circle around," your hunting leader says, "we can approach from downwind." Now the real work begins. Your group moves with practiced silence, spreading out in a loose formation. This hunt will take hours, stalking the animals slowly, getting close enough to use your weapons effectively. These aren't guns or even bows and arrows yet. You're using spears and throwing sticks, primitive but deadly in skilled hands. I've always wondered how I'd fare if I were suddenly transported back to this time. I'd probably last about half a day before something ate me or I drank bad water. These people were survival machines. The sun climbs higher and the heat intensifies. Sweat runs down your back. Salt stinging the scratches from yesterday's trek through thorny brush. Your throat is parched. Water is carried in animal bladders and it's rationed carefully. Every resource is precious. Your group successfully brings down 2 oryx after a grueling 6-hour hunt. Now comes the butchering, using stone tools to carefully separate meat, organs, hide and bone. Nothing is wasted. The meat will be shared among the entire group. Some will be eaten today, some dried to preserve it. Good throw, an older hunter says, examining your kill. Clean strike. The spirits favoured us today. These early people already had spiritual beliefs, connecting their survival to forces beyond themselves. They saw patterns in stars, in animal migrations, in the seasonal rains. Their worldview was forming, the very beginnings of what would eventually become the complex Egyptian religion. As night falls, your group returns to the cave. The women have gathered roots, berries, and edible plants to supplement the meat. Together, these foods provide just enough nutrition to survive. A fire is built and the meat is cooked. Wait, it gets better. These earliest inhabitants of Egypt left evidence of their existence, not in pyramids or papyrus, but in something even more personal. High up on rocky cliff faces at places like Kurta, about 100 kilometers south of Luxor, they carved images of the animals they hunted. So, imagine this. After the meal, with a full belly for the first time today, an elder takes a stone tool and begins to work on the rock wall of your shelter. By firelight, they carefully chip away, creating the unmistakable outline of an oryx. These aren't just decorations. They're a kind of hunting magic, a way of connecting with the animals and ensuring future success. The more we honour them, the elder explains, the more they give themselves to us. These rock carvings are the earliest art in Egypt, dating back to around 19,000 years ago. Some show hippos, others cattle, a few even depict human figures and boats, though the boats came later as the climate began to change. And speaking of climate change, that's exactly what would transform this green savanna into the Egypt we recognise. Around 10,000 years ago, the Earth's axis tilted slightly, by about half a degree. This tiny shift had profound consequences, gradually changing rainfall patterns across North Africa. The rains come later each year, an old woman observes as your group gathers around the fire, and they bring less water. She's right. Over your lifetime, you've noticed the seasonal lakes shrinking, the grasslands retreating, game animals are becoming harder to find. Your people have to travel farther for food, competing with other bands for dwindling resources. Fun fact that's not actually fun. This climate change wasn't caused by human activity like today's version. It was a natural shift that happened gradually over centuries, but for the people living through it, absolutely devastating. Imagine watching your entire environment slowly die around you with no understanding of why. Over generations, as the climate continued to dry, these nomadic hunters were forced to adapt. They began to follow the retreating moisture, moving closer to the large lakes that formed during the rainy season. One such area is called Nabta Playa, about 100 kilometers southwest of Abu Simbel in southern Egypt. Here's where things get wild. At Nabta Playa, these early people began to settle into communities, still relying on the annual summer rains, but they needed to predict exactly when these rains would return. Their solution? They turned to the night sky. When those stars, a tribal elder points upward to a specific constellation, appear directly overhead, the rains will come soon. What archaeologists discovered at Nabta Playa is mind-blowing. A stone circle about 7,000 years old, the earliest evidence of how Egyptian weather forecasters became astronomers. They aligned its central stones to the circumpolar stars, stars visible in the night sky all year round. When the sun appeared directly overhead, the stones cast no shadow, signalling that the midsummer rains were approaching. Think about this. Thousands of years before Stonehenge, these people were creating astronomical calendars to track the seasons, and this obsession with aligning monuments to celestial bodies, it would define Egyptian architecture for the next 5,000 years. Every tomb, every temple, every pyramid would be aligned to the stars. The connection they made was simple but profound. If the stars and rain were linked, then this world and the next must be connected. The physical and spiritual realms weren't separate but intertwined. As the climate continued to dry, these people focused more on the one reliable source of water, the Nile. Communities began forming along its banks, taking advantage of its annual flood that left behind rich, fertile soil perfect for growing crops. Look at how the black soil spreads after the water recedes. An early farmer tells his child, "This is the gift of the river." This black soil, Kemet, in ancient Egyptian, would give Egypt its name, the Black Land. By around 5000 BCE, these communities were cultivating wheat and barley, raising cattle and goats, producing the food surplus that would allow civilization to develop. With food production came specialization. Not everyone needed to farm or hunt. Some could become artisans, creating pottery, tools, and eventually luxury goods. Others became religious specialists, responsible for rituals that ensured the Nile's annual flood. I was reading this old archaeologist's field journal from a dig in the 1920s, and he described finding some of the earliest Egyptian pottery. The part that stuck with me was how he could see fingerprints pressed into the clay, actual fingerprints from someone who lived 7,000 years ago. Like, you're literally touching the past. These early settled communities developed distinct cultures in different parts of Egypt. In the north, settlements clustered around the delta and the Fayoum. In the south, they centered around the Kena bend of the Nile. These would become the two lands, Upper and Lower Egypt, that developed into two distinct cultures. What they shared was the miracle of the Nile, which transformed desert into paradise. Its annual flood renewed the soil's fertility, making it some of the most productive farmland in the ancient world. Egyptian farmers could grow everything from wheat and barley to figs, melons, and vegetables. Other lands need constant work, says a farmer as he watches the Nile waters recede from his fields. Ours gives to us freely. This isn't an exaggeration. While farmers in Mesopotamia had to constantly maintain complex irrigation systems, Egyptian agriculture was relatively straightforward. Plant after the flood recedes, harvest before the next one comes. The land practically farmed itself. But along with developing agriculture, these early Egyptians were also developing something else, a unique perspective on death. Unlike their nomadic ancestors, who might simply leave their dead behind, settled people needed ways to manage death within their communities. The body returns to the earth, an elder explains, as a community prepares a grave, but the person continues. This is where we first see the beginnings of what would become Egypt's most mysterious practice, mummification. It started naturally. When bodies were buried in the hot desert sand, they would dehydrate rather than decay, preserving the skin, hair, and nails. The Egyptians noticed this preservation and began to see it as significant. One particular burial from around 3400 BCE shows a body curled into a fetal position, suggesting rebirth, surrounded by pottery, jewellery and other possessions. Everything important in life accompanied the person into death. The message was clear: death wasn't the end, but a transition to another state of existence. Here's where it gets even weirder. For the Egyptians, the preservation of the body was crucial because it housed the soul. A skeleton wasn't enough. The person needed to be recognizable to house their spirit for eternity. Even when dead, we must appear as ourselves, a ritual specialist explains. How else will our K soul know where to dwell? Throughout Egypt's long history, this core belief would drive the development of increasingly elaborate mummification techniques. What began as simple burials in the sand would eventually become the complex process we associate with ancient Egypt. Removing organs, drying the body with natron salt, wrapping in linen and placing in decorated coffins. As settlements grew into towns and early cities, another crucial development was taking place: the emergence of writing. And you know what's funny about the world's earliest writing? It wasn't developed to express poetry or record history. It was created to calculate taxes. In the ancient city of Abydos, archaeologists found small bone and ivory labels dating to around 3250 BCE. Each was engraved with symbols of animals, birds or plants and was pierced for attachment to chests or vessels containing oil, linen or grain. These symbols represented the regions producing these commodities, sent as tax payments to a central authority. Each mark must be clear, instructs an official as scribes prepare the labels. The king must know what comes from each district. These simple symbols gradually evolved into the elegant hieroglyphic script that would record the Egyptian language for the next 3,000 years. So yeah, bureaucracy and taxes literally invented writing. As these communities grew in size and complexity, leadership became increasingly important. Local chiefs competed for resources and territory. The inevitable clash between the distinct cultures of Upper and Lower Egypt is recorded on what many consider to be Egypt's founding document, the Narmer Palette. This ceremonial palette depicts the moment when King Narmer of Upper Egypt defeated his northern enemy, unifying the two lands under one rule. It shows Narmer in the classic smiting pose, raising a mace above a kneeling captive's head. This powerful image would be repeated throughout Egyptian history. Narmer has united the two lands, a herald announces to the gathered crowd. The white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt now rest on one head. Narmer became Egypt's first king around 3100 BCE, establishing the first dynasty and creating what many scholars consider the world's first nation-state. Egypt was now a unified country with a single ruler, a shared culture, and a central government. When the sun sets on this first day of unified Egypt, you find yourself not in a cave or simple hut, but in a mud brick house in one of the growing settlements along the Nile. The river flows outside, its gentle sounds filtering through the reed mat hanging in your doorway. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, but also the continued unfolding of what would become one of history's most enduring civilizations. As you lay on your reed mat, listening to the night sounds of ancient Egypt, it's worth taking a moment to appreciate how far these people had come, from nomadic hunters following herds across a vanishing savanna to the creators of a unified state that would build the pyramids and temples we still marvel at today. The story was just beginning. Unlike your comfortable bed with its soft mattress and perfectly stuffed pillows, this early Egyptian sleeping arrangement is basic. A reed mat on a slightly elevated platform, maybe a headrest carved from wood or stone to keep your head off the ground and preserve your hairstyle. But after a long day of farming, fishing or building, even this simple bed feels welcoming enough. Dawn breaks over a different Egypt now. The year is roughly 2700 BCE, more than 4,700 years ago, and the early nation-state has evolved into something far more complex. You're standing on the west bank of the Nile, watching workers stream toward a massive construction project that will change how we think about human achievement forever. A foreman walks past, barking orders. Those limestone blocks need to be at the north face by midday. The king wants progress. This isn't the construction of the Great Pyramid yet. We're still in the early phases of Egypt's Pyramid Age. What you're witnessing is the beginning of the world's first major stone building, the Step Pyramid of King Djoser at Saqqara. Egypt has been unified for about 400 years now, ruled by pharaohs who trace their lineage back to Nama. These kings have been buried in large, flat-topped rectangular tombs called mastabas, basically glorified rectangular boxes covered with mud brick. Nice, but nothing revolutionary. But King Djoser and his brilliant architect Imhotep are about to change everything. Stack another level on top, Imhotep instructs the master builders, pointing to plans drawn on papyrus. Then another and another. The workers look at him like he's lost his mind. You want to build a mastaba on top of another mastaba? Yes, Imhotep says confidently. And then 4 more on top of that. This moment, this seemingly simple idea to stack mastabas of decreasing size on top of each other would create the Step Pyramid, Egypt's first monumental stone structure and the precursor to all true pyramids. I mean, picture this. No one had ever built something this big with stone before. It was like going from building log cabins to suddenly constructing the Empire State Building. The engineering problems they had to solve were insane. Saqqara becomes a hive of activity. Thousands of workers quarry limestone blocks, drag them on wooden sleds and carefully position them. Others mix mortar, shape decorative elements and carve inscriptions. It's not just a tomb being built, it's an entire complex with courtyards, temples and storage rooms. Imhotep's design isn't just big, it's revolutionary. When completed, the Step Pyramid will stand over 60 meters tall, almost 200 feet, with 6 distinct steps or levels. It's the tallest building on Earth at this time. The king's soul must ascend to join the imperishable stars in the north, a priest explains as you watch the construction. This monument creates the stairway for his journey. That's a key point about Egyptian pyramids. They weren't just massive tombs, they were machines for transformation designed to help the king's soul ascend to the heavens. Around noon, you follow workers to a canteen area where they receive their rations. The Egyptian state is feeding these workers well. Archaeological evidence shows they got plenty of bread, beer, fish, and even meat. These weren't slaves building the pyramids. They were skilled labourers, craftsmen, and seasonal farmers working during the Nile's annual flood when they couldn't tend their fields. "How many days have you been working here?" you ask a stonecutter as you share a jar of beer. 3 months this season, he tells you, taking a hunk of bread. "I'll stay until the flood recedes. The pay is good, enough grain to feed my family for the year, plus the honour of building for the king." That's something modern people don't get about ancient Egypt. Building these monuments wasn't just forced labour, it was part of their religious and social duty. The pharaoh maintained cosmic order, called Mawat, and ensured the Nile flooded properly, bringing fertility to the land. In return, the people contributed to his monuments. It was a divine pact that made Egypt function. As you walk through the construction site, you spot someone important, a man giving detailed instructions to the workers, consulting plans, and inspecting the quality of stonework. This is Imhotep himself, the genius behind the Step Pyramid. Imhotep wasn't born into royalty or wealth. Historians believe he came from a common background but rose through the ranks because of his brilliant mind. He was architect, physician, astronomer, and eventually high priest. Talk about career advancement. The dude went from commoner to practically divine. See how these blocks must fit precisely, he tells a group of stonecutters, running his hand along a seam. The king's eternal house must be perfect. Imhotep was so revered that after his death he achieved something almost unheard of for a non-royal. He was worshipped as a god of medicine and wisdom. The Greeks later identified him with their own god of medicine, Asclepius. Not bad for an architect. Let's fast forward about 75 years. The Step Pyramid was just the beginning. Now we're at Giza around 25 and 50 BCE, watching the construction of the Great Pyramid of King Khufu, the largest pyramid ever built and the only one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world still standing today. The scale is almost incomprehensible. Workers are setting in place 2.3 million blocks of stone, some weighing as much as 80 tons. The finished pyramid will stand 146 meters, 481 feet tall, with a base covering 13 acres. For context, you could fit St. Peter's Basilica in Rome inside this thing with room to spare. How do they move those massive blocks? You whisper to a supervisor. With great difficulty, he laughs. We cut the stone at the quarry, then drag it on wooden sleds. For the largest blocks, we need hundreds of men pulling together. Recent archaeological evidence suggests they also used clever techniques like wetting the sand in front of the sleds to reduce friction. The ancient Egyptians might not have had advanced technology, but they were masters at applying basic physics principles to solve enormous engineering challenges. Behind the massive wall now known as the Wall of the Crow lies an entire workers' city. About 20,000 people worked on the Great Pyramid, not all at once, but in rotating shifts throughout the year. Most were farmers who worked during the annual Nile flood when their fields were underwater. Others were permanent skilled craftsmen. Let's check out where they lived. You enter a section of barracks, long, narrow buildings with sleeping platforms for the workers. It's cramped by modern standards, with about 20 men sharing a dormitory-style room. The overseers sleep at each end, explains a worker, pointing to slightly raised platforms at both ends of the room. The rest of us sleep in between, head to foot. The workers' diets were surprisingly good. Archaeologists have found evidence they ate beef, sheep, goat, fish, and plenty of bread and beer. The state provided this food as payment, understanding that well-fed workers were productive workers. In the main workers' village at Giza, there's a designated area for food preparation. Massive bakeries churn out bread, breweries produce beer, and butchers process meat. The logistics of feeding thousands of workers daily was a massive operation in itself. 20 loaves per man, a supply master calculates, making marks on a papyrus sheet, plus 2 jars of beer, onions, garlic, and a portion of fish or meat. When the Egyptian state was strong, this system worked remarkably well. The labour was organised by a complex bureaucracy that kept detailed records of workers, supplies, and progress. Speaking of bureaucracy, that's another Egyptian invention we're still dealing with today. They had officials for everything, overseers of granaries, scribes of the royal documents, masters of the king's works. Every aspect of society was catalogued, recorded, and managed. Let's go inside one of the scribal offices near the construction site. A group of men sit cross-legged, writing on papyrus scrolls with reed pens. These are the accountants of ancient Egypt, keeping track of supplies, workers, and costs. 20 limestone blocks from Tura arrived today, dictates an overseer, while a scribe carefully records the information. 45 workers present in the east quadrant, 3 absent due to illness. Being a scribe was one of the best jobs in ancient Egypt. You avoided hard physical labor, earned a good living, and had social status. Egyptian parents encouraged their sons to train as scribes. There are actual ancient Egyptian school texts where fathers lecture their sons about the benefits of scribal education versus other professions. One famous text has a father telling his son, "Be a scribe. Your body will be sleek, your hand will be soft. You are one who sits grandly in your house. Your servants answer speedily. Beer is poured copiously. All who see you rejoice in good cheer." Translation: be a scribe so you don't have to do real work. Can sit around all day and drink lots of beer. While the pyramids were being built for the kings, most Egyptians lived in much simpler dwellings. Let's visit a typical Egyptian home from this period. It's made of mud brick, the perfect building material for Egypt's climate, staying cool during hot days and retaining warmth at night. The house has a central courtyard where much of the food preparation happens, surrounded by rooms for sleeping and storage. The roof is flat and accessible by an internal staircase. In hot weather, people sleep on the roof to catch the cooler night breezes. We do most of our living outside, explains the lady of the house as she grinds grain into flour. We only go inside to sleep or escape the midday sun. Egyptian furniture is minimal by modern standards. Reed mats cover the floors. Simple wooden stools and low tables serve for eating. Beds are wooden frames with woven reed mattresses. For a pillow, Egyptians use a curved wooden or stone headrest, not as uncomfortable as it looks once you get used to it. The house has no bathroom as we'd recognise it. A corner of the courtyard has a designated spot for a ceramic pot used as a toilet, emptied daily into the fields as fertiliser. Bathing happens with water carried from the Nile or a local canal poured over the body while standing in a shallow stone basin. We bathe daily, the woman tells you, noticing your interest. Cleanliness is important to us. This is true. Ancient Egyptians were obsessed with hygiene by ancient standards. They used natron, a natural salt, as soap, brushed their teeth with frayed reed brushes, and even used mint as breath freshener. While the royals and elites might use elaborate makeup, wigs and jewellery, ordinary Egyptians dress simply. Men typically wear a simple linen kilt, while women wear straight linen dresses with straps that cover their breasts. Children often go naked until puberty. Sandals are for the wealthy. Most people go barefoot. In the fields surrounding the village, farmers work with simple tools, wooden ploughs pulled by oxen, hoes, sickles for harvesting. Egyptian agriculture followed a predictable annual cycle governed by the Nile's flood. There are 3 seasons, a farmer explains while checking the irrigation channels in his field. Akhet, the flood, when the Nile rises and covers our fields. Pere, the growing season, when we plant after the waters recede. And Shemu, the harvest, before the cycle begins again. This natural rhythm gave Egyptian civilization remarkable stability. While other ancient societies struggled with unpredictable rainfall, the Nile's annual flood was reliable enough that Egyptians could build their entire society around it. Throughout the Old Kingdom, roughly 2700–2200 BCE, this system thrived. The king maintained cosmic order, the Nile flooded properly, crops were abundant, and monumental projects continued. Egypt was the superpower of its day, wealthy and secure behind its natural desert barriers. The pyramids of the 4th dynasty mark the pinnacle of this achievement. After Khufu's Great Pyramid, his son Khafra built the 2nd pyramid at Giza, the one with the Sphinx in front, and his grandson Menkaura built the 3rd, smaller pyramid. Together they form the iconic skyline we associate with ancient Egypt. But by the 5th dynasty, something was changing. The pyramids built by later kings were smaller, with less impressive materials. The massive building projects had strained Egypt's resources. Climate change was beginning to affect the reliability of the Nile flood. Political power was becoming more decentralized. Let's visit one final site before the Old Kingdom begins its decline. At Abusir, just south of Giza, King Unas has built his pyramid complex around 2400 BCE. What makes it special isn't its size, but what's inside. The walls of the burial chamber are carved with hundreds of hieroglyphic inscriptions known as the pyramid texts, the oldest religious writings in Egypt. These spells will protect the king in the afterlife, a priest explains, as artisans carefully carve the hieroglyphs. They will help him navigate the dangers, join with Osiris, and rise to the sky with Ra. The pyramid texts give us our first detailed look at ancient Egyptian religious beliefs. They describe a complex afterlife journey where the king must overcome obstacles, pass judgments, and transform into different divine forms. This religious tradition would evolve over thousands of years, but its core elements are already present. While Unas's causeway connecting his pyramid to the Valley Temple shows scenes of bounty and prosperity, it also contains a troubling image, emaciated figures representing famine victims. This rare moment of realism in Egyptian art hints at problems on the horizon. These are the Bedouin from the desert edges, an artist explains, painting the thin figures. They suffer when the rains fail, but such troubles could never reach the Black Land. He's wrong. By 2200 BCE, about 200 years after Unas, Egypt would face a series of low Nile floods, leading to famines, political instability, and the collapse of central authority. The Old Kingdom's end would plunge Egypt into its first dark age, a period of fragmentation called the First Intermediate Period. As the sun sets on the Pyramid Age, you watch workers heading home after a day of construction. They're tired but satisfied, participating in what they believe is the most important work possible, ensuring their king's immortality and, by extension, the stability of their world. They have no idea that the magnificent civilization they're building, with its massive monuments, complex bureaucracy, and elaborate religious traditions, will collapse within a few generations, that the divine order they take for granted is more fragile than they can imagine. Unlike your safe, predictable world with its weather forecasts and grocery stores, these ancient Egyptians live with constant uncertainty. One bad Nile flood means widespread hunger. One weak pharaoh means political instability. The monuments they build are, in part, an attempt to create permanence in an impermanent world. As night falls over the Giza Plateau, the partially completed Great Pyramid looms against the starry sky. Thousands of workers sleep in their barracks, exhausted from a day of hauling stone. In the nearby palace, Pharaoh Khufu reviews plans with his officials. And along the Nile, ordinary Egyptians sleep in their simple homes, trusting that tomorrow will be like today, unaware of the changes that will eventually transform their eternal empire. The Nile isn't flooding properly anymore. For the 5th year in a row, the waters have barely risen, leaving fields parched and granaries dangerously empty. We're now around 2180 BCE, and Egypt's Old Kingdom, the age of massive pyramids and centralized royal power, How can the king fail to bring the floods? A farmer asks, looking at his withered crops. Has he lost the favour of the gods? This is Egypt's first major crisis, what historians call the First Intermediate Period, a perfect storm of disasters, climate change bringing multiple low Nile floods, famine spreading through the countryside, and a weakened monarchy unable to respond effectively. Pharaoh Pepti II, the last significant king of the Old Kingdom, supposedly reigned for 94 years but ended his incredibly long rule as an ineffective old man. Think about this for a second. Imagine if Queen Elizabeth had stayed on the throne until she was 120 years old, increasingly frail and out of touch. The system just can't function properly with that kind of leadership vacuum. The collapse of central authority creates a power vacuum that regional governors, called nomarchs, quickly fill. These local rulers stop sending taxes to the capital, instead keeping resources to take care of their own territories. Egypt effectively splits back into the regional kingdoms it had been before Narmer's unification over 900 years earlier. Let's visit one of these regional power centres. At Moala in Upper Egypt, a nomarch named Ankhtifi has declared himself the effective ruler of his territory. He's had his tomb carved with an autobiography that tells us exactly what life was like during this chaotic time. I gave bread to the hungry and clothing to the naked, Ankhtifi's inscription boasts. I never allowed anyone to go hungry in this province. Reading between the lines of Ankhtifi's tomb text, we see a man taking advantage of the power vacuum. He describes military campaigns against neighbouring provinces, claiming he's bringing order, but really just expanding his territory. He barely mentions the king at all, just one tiny reference to a royal name, almost as an afterthought. I am the beginning and the end of mankind, Ankhtifi's inscription declares, since nobody like me existed before, nor will he exist. Talk about ego, but his self-promotion reveals something crucial. Local strongmen were now the real power in Egypt. The divine pharaoh was increasingly irrelevant. The real suffering, though, falls on ordinary Egyptians. Ankhtifi's tomb contains a chilling description. All of Upper Egypt was dying of hunger to such a degree that everyone had come to eating their children. While that's probably exaggerated for dramatic effect, like, look how bad things were until I saved everyone, archaeological evidence does show signs of widespread malnutrition during this period, without the coordinated response of a strong central government. Local areas were left to fend for themselves when the Nile failed to flood properly. Now, around 2050 BCE, we're in Thebes, modern Luxor. This southern city was previously a backwater, but it's becoming the centre of a movement to reunify Egypt. A family of local rulers named Mentuhotep, the war god Montu, is satisfied, are building military power and expanding northward. The South will rise again, jokes a soldier as troops gather for a northern campaign. Thebes will rule all Egypt. He's right. After decades of fighting, Mentuhotep II defeats the northern rulers based at Heracleopolis and reunifies Egypt around 2055 BCE, establishing what we now call the Middle Kingdom. Here's where things get really brutal. When archaeologists excavated Mentuhotep's temple complex at Dir el-Bahri, they found a mass grave containing about 60 soldiers. These weren't carefully mummified nobility. These were the actual guys who fought and died in the civil war to reunify Egypt. Look at this, an archaeologist says, pointing to a skeleton. Arrow penetration to the chest, and this one, massive head trauma, probably from a mace. These soldiers' bodies tell the violent story of reunification. Some had healed fractures from previous battles before being killed in their final fight. Others showed signs of having been finished off while helpless on the battlefield. All were collected and buried with honour in what might be the world's first known war cemetery. But the real horror of Egypt's civil war happened at Abydos, Egypt's most sacred site. This was the burial ground of Egypt's first kings, the ones who followed Narmer and established the early dynasties. During the civil war, northern troops did the unthinkable. They desecrated these royal tombs, burning them and destroying the royal mummies inside. The vile deed, as later texts called it, shattered Egypt's physical connection to its royal ancestors. The sacred bodies of the kings, meant to be preserved for eternity, were destroyed. It was an act of cultural desecration almost impossible for modern people to fully grasp. Imagine if someone burned down Arlington National Cemetery while simultaneously destroying the Constitution and Declaration of Independence. Mentuhotep Sing's reunification of Egypt was thus not just a political victory, but a spiritual restoration. He portrayed himself as the heir to the Old Kingdom, building a temple complex that combined pyramid and temple elements. He wore both the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt, symbolizing the reunification of the two lands. "I have healed the division," Mentuhotep declares in an inscription. "The two lands are united under my rule as they were under the kings of old." The Middle Kingdom that follows, roughly 2050–1650 BCE, is considered by many scholars to be Egypt's golden age, not of massive monuments like the Old Kingdom, but of art, literature, and a more humanistic culture. The trauma of the First Intermediate Period had changed Egyptian society profoundly. Let's visit the new capital at Itj Tawi, near the entrance to the Fayum region. The Middle Kingdom pharaohs have moved the administrative centre from Memphis to this new location, symbolising a fresh start. In the scribal schools attached to the royal court, something remarkable is happening. A new form of literature is emerging. Stories, teachings, and even what we might call novels. The best known is the tale of Sinuhe, about an Egyptian official who flees to Asia after the assassination of a king, lives among foreigners, and eventually returns home to Egypt. "Read it to me again," a young scribe asks his teacher, the part where Sinuhe fights the champion of Retinue. The teacher unrolls a papyrus scroll and reads dramatically. "Then he came at me while I waited. I shot him, my arrow sticking in his neck. He screamed, he fell on his nose. I slew him with his own battle axe." This is entertainment, not just religious or royal propaganda. The Egyptians are developing a rich literary tradition that includes adventure stories, wisdom texts, and even love poetry. Unlike the formal, idealized art and writing of the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom literature often deals with uncertainty, moral ambiguity, and real human emotions. Another important text from this period is the dialogue of a man with his bar, essentially, a man arguing with his soul about whether life is worth living, possibly the world's first recorded exploration of existential despair. The Egyptian who wrote it, whoever he was, would have understood Hamlet's "to be or not to be" perfectly well. "Why do I remain alive?" the man asks his soul. "Death is before me today, like the recovery of a sick man, like going outside after being confined." His soul responds, "If you think about burial, it's heartbreak. It's bringing tears by making a man miserable. Don't think about it." So basically, a guy is contemplating suicide, and his soul is like, "Dude, chill, death sucks too." This psychological depth reflects a culture coming to terms with the trauma of civil war and social collapse. The old certainties were gone. The king wasn't an untouchable god anymore, and the promise of eternal order had been broken. The Middle Kingdom response was to create a more accessible version of Egyptian culture. Royal portraiture becomes more humanistic. Kings are shown with worry lines and expressions that suggest the burden of rule. Regular people can now access afterlife magic previously reserved for royalty. Coffins for non-royals are inscribed with protective spells adapted from the royal pyramid texts. Even a craftsman like me can have an afterlife now, says a carpenter as he saves to buy his own inscribed coffin. The gods will know my name. This democratization of the afterlife is one of the most important developments in Egyptian religious history. By the Middle Kingdom, even middle-class Egyptians could purchase funeral equipment with protective spells and images, essentially giving them access to the same afterlife previously reserved for kings. The economic foundation for this cultural flowering comes from massive infrastructure projects started by the Middle Kingdom pharaohs. Let's visit one of them, a huge irrigation project in the Fayum region, where channels and dikes are being constructed to control the Nile's flow into this natural depression. When complete, this system will irrigate thousands of acres, explains an overseer as workers dig channels. Even in years of low flood, we'll have water stored here. Senusret III, one of the most powerful kings of the 12th dynasty, exemplifies the new Middle Kingdom ruler. His statues show him with a careworn, almost scowling expression, a far cry from the serene, idealized faces of Old Kingdom kings. The message is clear: ruling is hard work, not divine play. The king sleeps little, thinking of his people, a court official explains. His ears hear the needs of Upper and Lower Egypt. Senusret III was also a military badass who led campaigns into Nubia, modern Sudan, to secure Egypt's southern frontier and control the gold mines there. Instead of relying on the traditional Egyptian approach of periodic raids, he established a permanent military presence by building a series of massive fortresses along the Nile. These Middle Kingdom fortresses were engineering marvels, massive mud brick structures with walls up to 11 metres, 36 feet high, and moats that would make medieval castle builders jealous. The largest, Buhan, had an outer wall over a mile in circumference. They functioned as military bases, administrative centres, and trading posts rolled into one. These walls say to the Nubians, Egypt is here to stay, a garrison commander tells you as you walk the battlements. No one passes north or south without our permission. Control of these fortresses meant control of trade. Gold, ivory, ebony, and exotic animal skins flowed north from Inner Africa, while manufactured Egyptian goods went south. The fortresses also processed copper and other minerals mined in the surrounding deserts. But Egypt's influence wasn't limited to the south. During the Middle Kingdom, Egypt established trading connections across the Mediterranean world and into the Near East. At the port of Byblos in modern Lebanon, Egyptian merchants had a permanent presence trading for the cedar wood that Egyptians prized for shipbuilding and luxury items. Lebanon's mountains grow the finest cedars, an Egyptian trader tells you as a ship unloads at an Egyptian harbour. One tree can make a mast tall enough to carry a sail that moves a ship with 60 men and tons of cargo. Egyptian ships were technological marvels capable of navigating both the Nile and the Mediterranean. One of the most famous Middle Kingdom achievements was a trading expedition to the mysterious land of Punt, probably somewhere along the Red Sea coast of Africa, recorded in detailed relief carvings showing exotic goods being brought back to Egypt. From Punt we brought frankincense trees, ebony, gold, ivory and exotic animals, boasts an expedition leader, even baboons and a giraffe for the king's menagerie. The The Middle Kingdom also saw significant developments in everyday technology. Water clocks, improved pottery wheels, bronze working, and advancements in mathematics and medicine all occurred during this period. Egyptian doctors were famous throughout the ancient world, with specialized knowledge of anatomy, pharmaceuticals, and surgery. I found this old medical papyrus transcript where an Egyptian doctor describes treating a head wound. He examines it and says, "If you examine a man with a gash on his head that penetrates to the bone, you should palpate his wound. If you find that there is a swelling protruding on the outside of that gash, you should say about him, 'An ailment I will treat.'" But if the skull is actually split open, revealing the brain, the diagnosis changes, an ailment not to be treated, which is honestly fair enough for Bronze Age medicine. Despite these achievements, the Middle Kingdom contained the seeds of its own decline. Senusret III and his successor Amenemhat III had centralized power by reducing the authority of the nomarchs, those regional governors, but this meant the system depended increasingly on a strong king. When Amenemhat IV died after a brief reign, he was succeeded by a female pharaoh, his sister Sobekneferu. While she was a legitimate ruler, her brief reign, about 4 years, ended without a clear successor, concluding the 12th dynasty. The 13th dynasty that followed maintained the appearance of the Middle Kingdom, but with significantly less stability. In less than a century, more than 60 kings ruled in rapid succession, few lasting more than a year or two. Central control weakened, and Egypt began to fragment again. During this unstable period, new groups were moving into the Nile Delta from the Near East. Known to the Egyptians as Amu, or Asiatics, they gradually established themselves as rulers in the eastern delta city of Avaris. By around 1650 BCE, these foreign rulers, whom historians call the Hyksos, had gained control of northern Egypt, while a native Egyptian dynasty continued to rule the south from Thebes. Egypt was divided once more, entering the Second Intermediate Period, but this division was different from the first. Now, foreigners controlled a significant portion of Egypt, challenging not just political unity, but cultural identity. They worship strange gods, complains a Theban priest. They use curved swords instead of proper Egyptian weapons. They speak our language with strange accents. How can such people claim to be kings of Egypt? Yet the reality was more complex. Archaeological evidence shows the Hyksos quickly adopted Egyptian culture, writing, and royal titles. They worshipped Egyptian gods alongside their own deities. Rather than being simply foreign invaders, they represented the complex cultural mixing that comes with migration and integration. As the sun sets on the Middle Kingdom, Egypt stands at a crossroads. The confident, isolated civilization of the Old Kingdom is gone forever. The more cosmopolitan, internationally connected Middle Kingdom is fading. Ahead lies a period of foreign influence, followed by a new kind of Egyptian empire, one that will project its power far beyond the Nile Valley. In your modern bed, with its machine-made sheets and memory foam pillow, you can sleep secure knowing food will be available tomorrow regardless of weather or politics. But as you drift off in ancient Egypt at the end of the Middle Kingdom, such certainties are fading. The Nile may or may not flood properly. The gods may or may not be pleased. And foreigners with strange weapons and customs are moving into the land of the pharaohs, bringing both threat and opportunity to the world's most ancient civilization. Morning breaks over a divided Egypt. In the north, foreign rulers called the Hyksos control the delta from their capital at Avaris. In the south, Egyptian kings still rule from Thebes. We're in the Second Intermediate Period, around 1600 BCE, and tensions between these two kingdoms are reaching a breaking point. The Hyksos aren't what you might expect. Rather than wild barbarians, they're sophisticated rulers who've largely adopted Egyptian culture. They write in hieroglyphs, worship Egyptian gods alongside their own deities, and use Egyptian titles. Their kings have taken Egyptian throne names. The current ruler calls himself King Apophis. They want to be Egyptian, a Theban official scoffs. They wear our clothes, use our writing, but they'll never truly understand Ma'at, that concept of cosmic order, balance and justice that underpins Egyptian civilization. To the Thebans, only a true Egyptian king can maintain it. What makes the Hyksos truly threatening isn't just their control of northern Egypt, but their military innovations. They've introduced new weapons and tactics that give them an edge. The composite bow, more effective axes, and most importantly, the horse and chariot. Let's visit a Hyksos military camp outside Avaris. Soldiers are training with these strange new weapons, particularly the chariot, a light, fast, two-wheeled vehicle pulled by horses. Egypt had never seen anything like it before. The chariot is a mobile fighting platform, a Hyksos officer explains to new recruits. One man drives while the other shoots. We can strike and move before Egyptian infantry can even reach us. This military technology was revolutionary. Previously, Egyptian battles were mainly infantry affairs, masses of men with shields, spears, and maces slugging it out. The chariot changed everything, allowing archers to rapidly deploy, shoot, and relocate. It was the ancient equivalent of introducing tanks to a battlefield of foot soldiers. The standoff between Thebes and the Hyksos deteriorated when King Apophis sent a message to the Theban ruler Sekenenre-Ptah. The exact contents are lost to history, but it apparently contained an insult so severe that it provoked a military response. The message complained about hippos in a Theban pool making noise and keeping Apophis awake in his capital hundreds of miles away, a court official whispers. It was a deliberate provocation. Whatever the message contained, the conflict escalated. Sekenenre-Ptah led forces north against the Hyksos but died in the fighting. His mummy, discovered by archaeologists in the 1880s, shows the horrifying injuries that killed him. Massive wounds to the head from what were likely Hyksos-style axes. 5 separate blows, a royal physician says quietly, examining the king's body as it's prepared for mummification. He faced his enemies directly, too directly. The struggle continued under Sekenenre's son Kamose, who pushed further north, and then under his brother Amose, who finally succeeded around 1550 BCE. Amose besieged Avaris, captured it, and pursued the fleeing Hyksos all the way to their fortress at Sharuhen in southern Canaan, which he besieged for 3 years before capturing it. The victory over the Hyksos marks the beginning of Egypt's new kingdom, 1550–1069 BCE, arguably the peak of ancient Egyptian civilization, but something fundamental had changed. The experience of foreign occupation and the struggle to expel the invaders transformed Egypt from an insular kingdom into an aggressive empire. Never again will foreigners rule the Black Land, Ahmose declares to his troops. From now on, we will strike them in their own territories before they can threaten Egypt. This new imperial mindset, combined with the military technologies adopted from the Hyksos, particularly the chariot, turned Egypt into the ancient world's superpower. Under the kings of the 18th dynasty, Egyptian armies would march far beyond their traditional borders, creating an empire that stretched from Sudan to Syria. Let's jump ahead a few decades to the reign of Thutmose III, around 1450 BCE. He's led the Egyptian army north into Canaan, where he faces a coalition of local princes backed by the powerful kingdom of Mitanni at the Battle of Megiddo, probably the first major battle in history that we can reconstruct in detail. "The enemy has taken position at Megiddo," reports a scout to Thutmose. "They believe we must take the wide, safe road around the mountain, but there is a narrow path that leads directly to them. They won't expect us there." Thutmose makes a daring decision, leading his army through a narrow, dangerous mountain pass that his generals advise against. The gamble pays off. He catches the coalition forces by surprise and scatters them, forcing them to retreat into the walled city of Megiddo, which he then besieges for 7 months. If we had followed the easy path as the enemy expected, the battle would have been much harder, Thutmose tells his officers afterward. Sometimes the most dangerous route offers the greatest opportunity. Thutmose III would ultimately lead at least 17 military campaigns into the Near East, creating Egypt's first true empire. He was so successful that he's sometimes called the Napoleon of ancient Egypt. Under his rule, wealth poured into Egypt: gold, silver, precious woods, horses, and exotic goods from across the known world. But before Thutmose III's solo rule, there was one of the most remarkable chapters in Egyptian history, the reign of Hatshepsut, his stepmother and aunt, who ruled as a female pharaoh for about 22 years. Officially, Hatshepsut began as regent for young Thutmose III, who was only about 2 years old when his father died. But within a few years, she had taken the unprecedented step of declaring herself king. Not queen, but king, with all the titles and regalia of a male pharaoh. Let's visit her magnificent mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, where massive relief sculptures show Hatshepsut performing all the traditional duties of kingship. In these images, she's often depicted with a male body wearing the traditional false beard of the pharaohs, though other images show her in female form. The king must be shown performing the sacred rituals, explains a priest at the temple. Hatshepsut does everything a king must do to maintain Ma'at. One of Hatshepsut's greatest achievements was a trading expedition to the land of Punt, recorded in detail on her temple walls. The carvings show Egyptian ships sailing to this exotic location, probably somewhere in East Africa, where they traded for frankincense trees, ebony, gold, ivory, and exotic animals. The Punt expedition shows our strength extends beyond military conquest, says a court official proudly. Nations willingly trade with Egypt because of our wealth and prestige. After Hatshepsut's death, Thutmose III finally ruled alone, though he eventually had most references to Hatshepsut erased from monuments, probably to strengthen his son's claim to the throne rather than out of personal animosity. He built on her diplomatic and economic foundations while adding his own military conquests. By the height of the New Kingdom, around 1400 to 1300 BCE, Egypt had become unimaginably wealthy. Let's visit Thebes, now the religious capital, during a festival. The city is booming. Temples are expanding, trade goods from across the known world fill the markets, and construction projects are everywhere. The Temple of Karnak, dedicated to the god Amun, has become the largest religious complex in the world. Walking through its massive pillared halls, you're dwarfed by columns 24 meters, 80 feet high. This isn't just a temple, it's a statement of Egypt's power and prosperity. The temple owns lands throughout Egypt, a priest tells you proudly. Hundreds of villages, thousands of cattle, countless fields. Our granaries are always full. The cult of Amun has become incredibly powerful. Originally a minor local deity associated with Thebes, Amun rose to become the state god of Egypt. Identified with the sun god Ra as Amun-Ra, his priesthood controls vast wealth and wields significant political influence. Let's move from the temple to the palace of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, who rules around 1350 BCE at the absolute peak of Egypt's prosperity and international prestige. His palace at Malkata on Thebes' west bank is a sprawling complex with audience halls, residential quarters, artificial lakes and gardens. Diplomatic envoys from Babylon, Mitanni, Assyria and Hatti all wait to see the king, explains a royal steward as you walk through bustling palace courtyards. They bring tribute and requests for Egyptian gold. Egypt under Amenhotep III is so wealthy that he can literally give gold away to foreign rulers. In diplomatic letters found by archaeologists, the famous Amarna letters, foreign kings repeatedly beg Amenhotep for more gold, complaining that what he sent previously wasn't enough. A testament to Egypt's incredible resources. Gold in Egypt is more plentiful than dust, Amenhotep reportedly told one ambassador. This wasn't just royal propaganda. Egypt controlled the major gold-producing regions of Nubia and the Eastern Desert. A single mine could produce over a ton of gold per year, an astronomical amount in the ancient world. But regular Egyptians were prospering too. Let's visit the village of Deir el-Medina, home to the skilled workers who cut and decorated the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. Unlike the anonymous masses who built the pyramids, we know these people by name and their personal lives, thanks to thousands of written records they left behind. 8 bread loaves, 4 jars of beer, and half a sack of dates, recites a workman to his wife as he returns home, listing his pay for the day, plus this piece of linen the foreman gave me for fixing his door. Workers like him were well-compensated specialists, the elite craftsmen of their day. They received official rations, but also earned extra income through side work. Their homes were small but comfortable, with multiple rooms, some basic furniture, and even artwork on the walls. What's most remarkable about Deir el-Medina is how much it tells us about ordinary life in New Kingdom Egypt. The workers left behind everything from official records to personal letters, medical prescriptions, love poems, and even gossip. One ostracon, a pottery shard used as a writing surface, records a worker complaining that his neighbour's donkey ate his vegetables. Another contains a love poem from a young man to his girlfriend. "Your love has gone clear through my body like honey mixed with water," reads the poem. "My heart races when I think of you." Daily life for these workers followed a predictable pattern. They worked 8 days, then took 2 days off, the earliest known weekend. They received regular deliveries of food, water, and supplies from the state. When not working in the royal tombs, they created their own tombs, built furniture, and performed various specialized crafts. Not all was harmony, though. Records from Deir el-Medina document the first recorded labor strike in history. When grain deliveries were late, the workers simply sat down at the entrance to the Valley of the Kings. "We are hungry," their leader announced to officials. "We have no grain, no oil, no fish, no vegetables. Tell this to Pharaoh. We cannot cut his tomb if we starve." The officials scrambled to address the problem, eventually providing the missing rations. This wasn't a modern-style labour movement, but it shows that even in ancient autocracies, workers could assert themselves when pushed too far. The tombs these workers created in the Valley of the Kings were masterpieces of art and engineering. Unlike the pyramids, which advertised the king's burial place to everyone, these tombs were cut deep into the limestone cliffs, hidden from view and potential robbers. Their walls were covered with religious texts and images to help the king navigate the afterlife. Each scene must be perfect, a master artist instructs his apprentice as they paint a tomb wall. The king's eternal life depends on it. The New Kingdom saw changes in burial practices for royalty. While kings were still mummified with elaborate rituals, their bodies were now placed in a series of nested coffins, often made of solid gold or gold-covered wood, rather than in massive stone sarcophagi. The famous golden mask of Tutankhamun gives us an idea of the splendour of royal burial equipment during this period. Speaking of Tutankhamun, his relatively minor reign comes after one of the most dramatic episodes in Egyptian history, the religious revolution of Akhenaten, but that's a story for another time. For ordinary Egyptians in the New Kingdom, life was generally better than it had been in earlier periods. The empire brought wealth that trickled down through society. Diets improved with greater variety of foods, including imports. Cosmetics, jewellery and luxury goods became more widely available. Even common homes often had decorative elements and some basic furniture. Medical care also advanced. The Edwin Smith surgical papyrus from this period shows Egyptian physicians had sophisticated knowledge of anatomy and trauma treatment. They could set broken bones, stitch wounds, and even perform simple surgeries. They had an extensive pharmacopoeia of plant-based medicines, though these were often mixed with magical incantations. For a wound, apply fresh meat on the first day, a physician instructs his student. Then dress it with oil, honey, and plant fibres. Recite the healing spell twice daily. Education expanded during the New Kingdom, with more people learning to read and write than in previous eras. While still limited mostly to boys from privileged families, literacy was no longer just for specialised scribes. Military officers, priests, administrators, and merchants often had basic literacy. Clothing and fashion evolved too. While the basic garments remained simple linen kilts for men and sheath dresses for women, styles became more elaborate for the wealthy. Pleated, draped, and layered garments appear in artwork. Wigs grew more elaborate and jewellery more intricate. The latest style from the capital, a wig maker tells a wealthy client, showing her an elaborate creation. All the court ladies wear them this way now. This increasing sophistication reflected Egypt's growing international connections. The New Kingdom was far more cosmopolitan than earlier periods. Foreign diplomats, merchants and captives brought new ideas, technologies and customs. Egyptian art shows influences from Minoan Crete, Mesopotamia and the Levant. The royal court became increasingly international. Egyptian kings maintained diplomatic marriages with foreign princesses, who brought their own entourages and customs. Foreign mercenaries served in the Egyptian military, eventually settling and integrating into society. As the sun sets on Amenhotep III's Egypt, the empire is at its absolute peak, wealthy, powerful, prestigious. No one could imagine that within a generation his son Akhenaten would upend Egyptian religion in a radical experiment that would threaten centuries of tradition. Or that within a century, Egypt would face a new threat from the sea that would begin its long, slow decline. Lying in your comfortable modern bed, you have the luxury of historical perspective. You know that even the mightiest civilizations eventually fade, but for an Egyptian living in the glory days of Amenhotep III, the divine order established at creation seemed as permanent as the stars. Egypt had overcome division, expelled foreign rulers, and created an empire. The temples were wealthy, the army was strong, and the gods were pleased. What could possibly go wrong? The royal palace at Thebes is in chaos. Amenhotep IV, son of the great Amenhotep III, has just made an announcement that's left the court stunned. He's changing his name to Akhenaten, effective for Aten, abandoning the traditional gods and moving the capital from Thebes to a new city he'll build in the middle of nowhere. Has the king lost his mind? Whispers a priest of Amun, looking around nervously to see if anyone overheard. We're witnessing one of history's first recorded religious revolutions. Around 1350 BCE, Akhenaten upended over 1,500 years of Egyptian religious tradition by elevating a minor aspect of the sun god, the Aten, the physical disk of the sun, to supreme deity, while suppressing the worship of other gods, particularly Amun. The Aten alone gives life, Akhenaten declares to his court. All other gods are false. Only through the Aten, and through me, its son, can truth be known. This wasn't just a theological shift, it was a direct attack on the powerful priesthood of Amun, who had grown so wealthy and influential that they threatened the king's authority. By closing their temples and redirecting their revenues to his new religion, Akhenaten was staging nothing less than a palace coup against the religious establishment. Within a few years, Akhenaten has moved his court to a new city called Akhenaten, horizon of the Aten, modern Tel El Amarna, built in a previously uninhabited stretch of desert about halfway between Thebes and Memphis. Let's visit this strange new capital as it's being constructed. Everywhere you look, workers are hauling stone, making mud bricks and raising buildings. The city is being built at an astonishing pace, with thousands of labourers working around the clock. The central area contains huge open-air temples to the Aten. Unlike traditional Egyptian temples, these have no roofs or inner sanctums, allowing the sun's rays to shine directly on the worship spaces. No dark chambers, no hidden mysteries, explains a royal architect. The Aten's light must reach everything. What's most striking about Akhenaten is how different it feels from traditional Egyptian cities. The art style has changed dramatically. Images of the king and his family show them with elongated heads, drooping features, and exaggerated physical characteristics. A complete departure from the idealized athletic depictions of previous pharaohs. The king says we must show things as they truly are, an artist explains as he carves a relief showing the royal family. No more perfect bodies, no more symbolic poses, truth alone matters now. Some scholars think these strange depictions might indicate Akhenaten suffered from a genetic disorder. Others believe it was purely a stylistic choice to break with artistic tradition. Whatever the reason, the Amarna style art is some of the most distinctive and strange from ancient Egypt. Most shocking of all are the intimate scenes of the royal family. Akhenaten is shown kissing his wife, bouncing his daughters on his knee, relaxing with his family under the rays of the Aten. Nothing like this exists in previous royal Egyptian art, where pharaohs were shown smiting enemies or standing stiffly before gods, not displaying affection to their families. The king says his love for his family mirrors the Aten's love for creation, explains a court official, though he looks uncomfortable with this radical new imagery. The queen at the centre of these family scenes is the famous Nefertiti, whose limestone bust in Berlin is one of the most recognised images from ancient Egypt. As Akhenaten's chief wife, she plays an unprecedented role in the new religion, almost as an equal partner to the king. The queen performs offerings alongside Pharaoh, a priest of the Aten tells you with pride. She is called the Beautiful One has come, and through her beauty the Aten's glory is revealed. But not everyone is happy with the religious revolution. In Thebes and other traditional religious centres, the closed temples of Amun sit empty, their priests dismissed, their revenues redirected to the Aten cult. The ordinary people whose families have worshipped the traditional gods for countless generations continue their practices in secret. "My grandfather was a priest of Ptah," whispers a craftsman as he checks no one is listening. "He taught me the old prayers. At night we still recite them with a statue hidden under the floor of our house." For all its radical theology, daily life in Akhenaten follows familiar Egyptian patterns. The king and his nobles live in luxurious palaces and villas, while ordinary workers inhabit simple mud brick homes. Markets still operate, craftsmen still practice their trades, and the bureaucracy still keeps meticulous records. Recent archaeological work at Amarna has uncovered the city's cemeteries, revealing a grim reality behind the beautiful art and high-minded theology. The skeletal remains show evidence of malnutrition, heavy physical labour, and numerous injuries. The city was built so quickly that the workers paid a high physical price. "My back is never without pain," confides a labourer as he hauls stone blocks. "We work from sunrise to sunset with few breaks. The king says we are blessed by the Aten, but my blessings feel like curses some days." Akhenaten's religious revolution lasted less than 2 decades. When he died around 1336 BCE, the experiment quickly unravelled. His immediate successor was Neferuaten, possibly Nefertiti ruling under a new name, followed by a shadowy figure named Smenkhkare. Then came Akhenaten's young son, originally named Tutankhamun, who would soon change his name to Tutankhamun and restore the traditional gods. Let's visit Thebes during this restoration period. The temples of Amun are reopening. Priests who had been forced into other occupations return to their duties. Statues of the traditional gods hidden away during Akhenaten's reign are being brought back to their shrines. "The divine order is restored," declares an elderly priest, tears in his eyes as he watches Amun's statue being carried back into Karnak Temple. The years of heresy are over. The boy king Tutankhamun, probably around 10 years old when he took the throne, is guided by powerful advisors, particularly an official named A and the general Horemheb. They orchestrate the return to orthodoxy, carefully dismantling Akhenaten's religious changes while maintaining royal authority. "The king has seen the truth and returned to the gods of his ancestors," I announces to the crowd at Karnak. Amun welcomes his son home. Tutankhamun's reign was brief. He died at about 19, possibly from complications after breaking his leg. His small tomb in the Valley of the Kings was largely overlooked by grave robbers, which is why his burial treasures survived intact until Howard Carter discovered them in 1922. The boy king, who was a minor figure in Egyptian history, became its most famous pharaoh through this archaeological accident. After Tutankhamun's death, his advisor A briefly took the throne, followed by the general Horemheb. Having no sons, Horemheb appointed his own vizier Paramessu as his successor. This man, who took the throne name Ramses I, founded the 19th dynasty around 1292 BCE. His son Seti I and grandson Ramses II would restore Egypt to glory after the disruptions of the Amarna period. Let's visit Egypt during the early reign of Ramses II around 1279 BCE, who would become known to history as Ramses the Great. The royal court has moved back to Pi-Ramesses in the Delta, a city rebuilt and expanded from the old Hyksos capital of Avaris. It's a vast, impressive city with multiple palace complexes, military barracks and temples. Ramesses is particularly focused on military glory, eager to restore Egypt's empire after its neglect during the Amarna period. The king trains with his chariot every morning, an officer tells you as you watch Ramesses practicing with bow and arrow while driving his chariot at full speed. He can hit a target no larger than your fist while the horses gallop. Maybe an exaggeration, but Ramesses II cultivated an image as a mighty warrior king. In his 5th year on the throne, he led the Egyptian army north against the rising power of the Hittite Empire, culminating in the Battle of Kadesh in what is now Syria, probably the largest chariot battle in history, with thousands of chariots involved. I was there. An aging veteran tells wide-eyed recruits at the barracks. Our scouts brought false information, led us into a trap. The Hittite chariots attacked from nowhere while we were making camp. The king himself rallied us, charged into the enemy alone while his cowardly officers fled. This is the official version of events, immortalized in grandiose relief carvings and inscriptions at multiple Egyptian temples. Ramesses claimed a great victory, but historical reality was probably closer to a draw. What's certain is that both sides suffered heavy losses, eventually leading to the world's first recorded peace treaty 16 years later. A copy of this treaty, written on silver tablets, was displayed at Ramesses. A good brotherhood is established, lasting peace is established, it declares. Egypt and Hatti, the Hittite Empire, are at peace, and it shall be for eternity. Ramesses II ruled for an astonishing 66 years, becoming almost a living institution. He built on a scale not seen since the Pyramid Age, completing his father's temple at Abydos, adding enormously to the temples at Karnak and Luxor, and constructing his own magnificent temples, including Abu Simbel, far to the south in Nubia. No king has built so much since the days of the gods, boasts a royal architect. Ramesses' monuments will last until the stars fall from the sky. He wasn't exaggerating much. Ramesses erected so many statues, obelisks and buildings that later pharaohs would give up trying to match him and simply carve their names on his monuments. He was so prolific that today almost any large ancient Egyptian statue is jokingly said to be probably Ramesses II. This period is well known to us because of extensive archaeological remains, but also because of remarkable preservation of written materials. At Deir el-Medina, the village of tomb workers, thousands of written records on papyrus and limestone flakes give us an unprecedented view into daily life. One such record reveals that the workers weren't immune to human foibles. A worker named Paneb is accused by his colleagues of stealing tools, sexually harassing women, and bribing officials. He is a bad man, the complaint states. He sits drinking with those who should judge him. Other texts show workers borrowing items from each other, arguing over property, exchanging love poems, and dealing with family problems. A physician's notes list treatments for everything from eye infections to snake bites. A dream interpreter records people's nightmares and explains their meanings. "I dreamed my teeth fell out," a worried man tells the interpreter. "It means someone in your household will die," comes the grim response. These texts reveal a surprisingly recognizable society, with people gossiping, falling in love, arguing with neighbors, and worrying about their health and finances, just like us, despite the gulf of 3,300 years. After Ramesses II's extraordinarily long reign, his 13th son, many others having died before their elderly father, took the throne as Merneptah. Almost immediately he faced a serious threat, an invasion by a coalition of Libyan tribes and mysterious groups called the Sea Peoples mentioned in Egyptian texts. "They came from the islands and the coastlands," reports a military officer, pointing to the western delta where fighting has been fierce. Strange warriors with feathered headdresses and foreign weapons. They brought their wives and children in ox carts, looking to settle, not just raid. Merneptah defeated this initial invasion, commemorating his victory on a stele that contains the first known written mention of Israel as a people, but the Sea Peoples would return in greater numbers a few decades later, contributing to a perfect storm of crises that would end the New Kingdom. By the reign of Ramses III, around 1186 to 1155 BCE, multiple threats converged on Egypt. More invasions by the Sea Peoples, economic problems, climate change affecting harvests, and internal corruption, while Ramses III successfully fought off the Sea Peoples, recording his victory in detailed relief carvings at his mortuary temple. The cost of these wars drained Egypt's resources. "The treasury is empty," a royal official confides to a colleague as they review accounts. "We cannot pay the tomb workers. The grain warehouses have less than half last year's amount." Internal documents show the government struggling to maintain basic services. Inflation drove up grain prices. Corruption meant that supplies meant for workers often disappeared before reaching them. The workers at Deir el-Medina staged several strikes when their pay was late, something unthinkable in earlier, more prosperous times. Ramses III's death came under violent circumstances. He was the victim of a harem conspiracy. A group of officials, along with one of his lesser wives who wanted her son on the throne, plotted to assassinate him using what the trial records call evil magic, as well as more practical methods. They made potions. A horrified witness testifies during the trial of the conspirators. They created wax figures to work spells against His Majesty. The chief of the guards was corrupted to let them approach the king's chambers. Whether through magic or mundane means, the plot partially succeeded. Recent CT scans of Ramses III's mummy show his throat was cut, though the conspirators failed to put their chosen successor on the throne. The remaining Ramessid kings, Ramesses IV through Anafinth, presided over Egypt's gradual decline. The empire contracted, with territories in Asia lost to rising local powers. The economy struggled with inflation and corruption, and in Thebes the priesthood of Amun was once again becoming a state within a state. By the end of the New Kingdom around 1069 BCE, Egypt had effectively split again. The high priests of Amun controlled Thebes and the south, while a new dynasty of kings ruled from Tanis in the delta. The imperial age was over, and Egypt entered the third intermediate period, another era of division and reduced international influence. As night falls on the New Kingdom, Egypt has changed dramatically from the isolated pyramid-building society of the Old Kingdom. It has experienced imperial glory and religious revolution, interacted with international powers, and absorbed foreign influences. Its art, literature, and culture have reached heights of sophistication, but the strain of maintaining an empire, combined with changing climate conditions and internal corruption, has left it vulnerable. Looking back from your comfortable modern perspective, you might wonder how such a mighty civilization could decline, but nothing lasts forever. Not even Egypt, with its obsession with eternity. The same environmental changes, resource pressures, and human failings that challenge societies today affected ancient peoples just as powerfully. As you drift towards sleep, consider how the Egyptians themselves viewed these cycles of prosperity and decline. They didn't see history as a straight line of progress, but as a constant struggle to maintain Ma'at against the forces of chaos. In their worldview, order must be actively preserved through proper rituals, ethical behavior, and strong leadership. When these failed, chaos inevitably returned. Unlike your modern world of constant change and innovation, the Egyptians idealized stability and continuity. Their greatest kings weren't celebrated for creating new things, but for restoring the perfect order established at creation. Ramses II wasn't great because he was original, but because he so perfectly embodied the traditional pharaonic role. As you settle deeper into your bed, with its factory-made frame and synthetic materials that would baffle an ancient Egyptian, remember that their world, for all its differences, was filled with people who shared our fundamental hopes and fears for security, health, meaning, and some small measure of happiness in an uncertain world. Dawn breaks over a divided Egypt once again. The year is roughly 945 BCE, and the glorious days of the New Kingdom are long gone. Egypt has entered what historians call the Third Intermediate Period, with power split between different rulers in different regions. The country that once dominated the ancient world has turned inward, its borders shrinking, its influence waning. The two lands are no longer one, sighs an elderly priest at Karnak Temple. In the north, kings of foreign blood rule from Tanis. Here in Thebes, the high priests of Amun hold power. Egypt is broken again. These kings of foreign blood he mentions are the rulers of the 22nd dynasty, descended from Libyan mercenaries who had settled in Egypt generations earlier. Their founder, King Sheshonq I, had been a military commander before seizing the throne. Though technically foreigners, these Libyan kings had thoroughly adopted Egyptian culture, ruling as traditional pharaohs. Let's visit Tanis, their delta capital, where King Sheshonq is preparing for something that hasn't happened in a long time, an Egyptian military campaign beyond its borders. Solomon is dead, a scout reports to Sheshonq, referring to the Israelite king. His kingdom is divided and weakened. Now is the time to reassert Egyptian control in Canaan. Sheshonq nods, studying a papyrus map of the Levant. Prepare the army. We march in a month. This campaign, around 925 BCE, would be recorded in Egyptian texts as a great victory. More significantly, it's also mentioned in the Bible as the invasion of Shishak, providing a rare synchronization point between Egyptian history and biblical chronology. But this brief revival of Egyptian power wouldn't last. By 800 BCE, Egypt had fragmented further, with multiple dynasties ruling different parts of the country simultaneously. In the south, the kingdom of Kush, in modern Sudan, was growing stronger, its rulers absorbing Egyptian culture and religion, just as Egypt had once dominated Nubia. Let's jump ahead to 728 BCE, when King Pi of Kush leads his army north into Egypt proper. Unlike earlier invaders, the Kushite kings considered themselves the legitimate restorers of Egyptian tradition, worshipping the Egyptian gods, especially Amun, and using Egyptian writing and royal symbols. We come not as conquerors, but as restorers, Pi declares to the people of Thebes who welcome his army. The true ways of Egypt have been forgotten. We will revive them. The Kushite rulers established the 25th dynasty, unifying Egypt under their control. They embarked on an ambitious program of temple restoration and cultural revival, seeing themselves as rescuing Egyptian civilization from decay and foreign corruption. At Jebel Barkal, in their Nubian homeland, they built Egyptian-style pyramids for their burials, actually constructing more pyramids than the Egyptians had built in Egypt. They portrayed themselves in art using traditional Egyptian royal iconography, though often with distinctively Nubian features. The king worships Amun as the kings of old did, a Kushite official explains to Egyptian priests at Karnak. He follows all the proper rituals. He builds monuments to the gods. Is this not what a true pharaoh does? This Kushite revival would be cut short by a new threat from the east, the expanding Assyrian Empire, the superpower of its day. Under kings like Esarhaddon and Ashurbanipal, Assyrian armies invaded Egypt around 671 BCE. Unlike previous invaders who had adopted Egyptian culture, the Assyrians were interested primarily in loot and tribute. They sacked Thebes in 663 BCE, an event so shocking it was mentioned in the Bible as a cautionary tale. The Assyrians show no respect for our temples, a stunned priest tells you as he surveys the damage to Karnak. They took the gold, killed the sacred animals, mocked our gods. Not even the Hyksos did such things. The Assyrian conquest was brutal but relatively brief. As their empire became overextended, they withdrew, leaving Egypt in the hands of client rulers based in the delta city of Sais. These Site kings of the 26th dynasty managed to reunify Egypt around 664 BCE, beginning the period historians call the Late Period. The Site kings, particularly Psamtik I and Necho II, attempted to restore Egypt's power while maintaining independence from Assyria. They recruited Greek mercenaries, built up Egypt's navy, and even sponsored trading and exploration expeditions. One such expedition reportedly circumnavigated Africa, a journey that took 3 years. The Greeks are excellent fighters, comments an Egyptian officer as he watches mercenaries train, but they have strange ideas. They argue with their commanders and expect to be told why orders are given, not just to obey. This increasing Greek presence in Egypt foreshadowed later developments. Trading colonies were established, particularly at Naucratis in the Delta, creating communities of foreign merchants who lived under their own laws while respecting Egyptian authority. Under the Site kings, Egyptian culture experienced a renaissance. Artists and craftsmen deliberately copied the styles of the Old and Middle Kingdoms, creating what scholars call archaizing works, new art that intentionally looked ancient. We study the works of the old masters, explains a sculptor in his workshop. The ancients understood perfection. We seek to recapture what has been lost. This cultural revival extended to religion, with renewed emphasis on traditional cults and practices. Animal mummification reached industrial scale, with millions of mummified cats, birds, and other creatures prepared as offerings to the gods. At sites like Saqqara, vast catacombs were filled with these animal mummies. Each ibis contains the essence of Thoth, a priest explains as he oversees workers preparing bird mummies. Each cat embodies Bastet. Through them, the worshipper establishes connection with the divine. Despite this cultural flowering, Egypt couldn't escape geopolitical reality. As Assyria declined, a new power rose. Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar II, and behind Babylon waited the growing might of the Persian Empire. In 525 BCE, the Persian king Cambyses II invaded Egypt, defeating the last Site pharaoh Psamtik III. Egypt became a province, or satrapy, of the Persian Empire, ruled by a Persian governor with Egyptian administrators handling day-to-day matters. Cambyses quickly discovered that conquering Egypt was easier than governing it. According to later sources, admittedly hostile, he committed a grave sacrilege by killing the sacred Apis bull at Memphis. He stabbed the living god with his dagger, a horrified priest whispers, describing the scene. The bull fell bleeding on the sacred ground. Cambyses laughed while the people wept. While this story may be exaggerated or even fabricated, it reflected Egyptian views of their Persian rulers as impious foreigners who didn't respect Egyptian traditions. Unlike the Libyans and Kushites who had fully embraced Egyptian ways, or even the Hyksos who had partially adopted them, the Persians ruled Egypt as a conquered territory within their vast multi-ethnic empire. Persian rule wasn't entirely negative for Egypt, though. The Persians invested in infrastructure, clearing and extending canal systems, and generally maintained order. Some Persian kings even presented themselves as traditional pharaohs when dealing with Egyptian subjects, having themselves depicted in Egyptian style on temple reliefs. The great king understands he must appear as pharaoh to us, explains an Egyptian official serving under the Persians. He wears the double crown in Egyptian temples, even if he wears Persian robes in Persepolis. The first period of Persian rule, the 27th dynasty, lasted until 404 BCE, when Egypt successfully revolted and established a series of short-lived native dynasties. These last native Egyptian rulers, particularly Nectanebo-Fernand II of the 30th dynasty, again revived traditional culture, building temples and promoting Egyptian religion. But independence wouldn't last. In 343 BCE, the Persians reconquered Egypt, beginning the 31st dynasty. This second Persian period was harsher than the first, with higher taxes and less accommodation to Egyptian sensibilities. "They take everything," complains a farmer, as tax collectors count his grain harvest. First a portion for the local temple, then for the provincial governor, then for the satrap, and finally for the great king himself. What remains for my family? Persian rule might have continued indefinitely if not for the most unexpected development of all, the arrival of Alexander the Great. In 332 BCE, fresh from defeating the Persian forces in Asia Minor, the young Macedonian conqueror entered Egypt with his army. To the Egyptians' surprise, Alexander was welcomed not as another foreign oppressor, but as a liberator from Persian rule. He made a deliberate effort to respect Egyptian traditions, travelling to the famous oracle of Amun at the Siwa oasis, where priests supposedly confirmed his divine status. The god recognized him as son of Amun, declares a priest who witnessed the oracle's pronouncement. He is pharaoh by divine right, not merely by conquest. Whether Alexander genuinely believed this or simply understood its political value, he allowed himself to be portrayed as a traditional Egyptian king. During his brief stay in Egypt, he made his most enduring contribution, founding the city of Alexandria on the Mediterranean coast. Here, where Egyptian land meets the Great Sea, we will build a new kind of city, Alexander tells his architects as they survey the coastal site. A bridge between Egypt and Greece, between East and West, the greatest trading centre in our new world. Alexandria would indeed become the most important city in the Eastern Mediterranean, but Alexander wouldn't live to see it. After leaving Egypt to continue his campaign against Persia, he died in Babylon in 323 BCE, aged only 32. Alexander's death triggered a power struggle among his generals. Egypt fell to Ptolemy, one of Alexander's closest companions, who established himself as ruler and eventually declared himself king, founding the Ptolemaic dynasty, the last to rule ancient Egypt. Let's visit Alexandria around 250 BCE, during the reign of Ptolemy II Philadelphus. The city has been transformed from Alexander's original plans into a metropolitan wonder with a population approaching 500,000, making it one of the largest cities in the world at that time. No city compares to Alexandria, boasts a Greek merchant as he guides you through bustling streets. We have the greatest library in the world, with over 500,000 books. The lighthouse at Pharos stands over 100 metres tall, guiding ships to our harbour. Scholars, poets and philosophers from every land come to study here. Alexandria, under the Ptolemies, was indeed a cultural powerhouse, home to mathematical geniuses like Euclid, inventors like Archimedes, poets like Callimachus, and scientists like Eratosthenes, who correctly calculated Earth's circumference with remarkable accuracy. The Ptolemaic kings ruled as traditional pharaohs when dealing with their Egyptian subjects, depicted on temple walls in traditional royal regalia performing ancient rituals, but they were also Hellenistic monarchs, speaking Greek, celebrating Greek festivals and maintaining a court culture that was thoroughly Greek. In Alexandria, I speak Greek and wear Greek clothes, explains an Egyptian official who serves in the royal administration. When I return to my home in the countryside, I speak Egyptian and make offerings at our local temple. We live in two worlds now. This cultural divide characterized Ptolemaic Egypt. The ruling elite was predominantly Greek, living mainly in Alexandria and a few other Greek-style cities. The vast majority of the population remained Egyptian, continuing ancient traditions in the countryside largely unchanged. The Ptolemies were pragmatic rulers who understood the importance of Egyptian religion for maintaining social stability. They built magnificent temples throughout Egypt, including Edfu, Dendera, and Philae, some of the best preserved temples that tourists visit today. The king may worship Greek gods in his palace, comments a priest at Edfu as stonemasons carve hieroglyphic inscriptions. But he knows that here he must honour Horus as pharaohs have done since time began. Despite this cultural accommodation, tensions existed between the Greek ruling class and the Egyptian population. Periodic revolts broke out, particularly in Upper Egypt, where resentment of foreign rule ran deep. The Ptolemies responded with military force when necessary, but also with strategic concessions to Egyptian elites. By the late Ptolemaic period, Rome was emerging as the dominant Mediterranean power. Egypt's vast grain resources made it crucially important to Roman food security, and the Romans increasingly intervened in Ptolemaic succession disputes. The final act of the Ptolemaic dynasty and of independent ancient Egypt starred history's most famous Egyptian ruler, who wasn't actually Egyptian, Cleopatra VII. Born into the Ptolemaic royal family, she was of Greek Macedonian descent, not Egyptian, though she was reportedly the first of her dynasty to actually learn the Egyptian language. The queen speaks to the temple priests in their own tongue, an amazed courtier reports. She performs the rituals perfectly, without scribes reading the words for her. The priests say no ruler since the great Ramses has shown such respect for tradition. Cleopatra's intelligence, charisma, and political acumen made her a formidable player in the power struggles of her time. Her relationships with Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony were both romantic connections and strategic alliances aimed at preserving Egypt's independence in the face of Roman expansion. Rome can crush us with its legions, Cleopatra allegedly told her advisors, so we must make ourselves too valuable to crush. For a time, the strategy worked. With Caesar's support, Cleopatra consolidated her rule in Egypt. After his assassination, she allied with Mark Antony against Caesar's heir Octavian, later known as Augustus. But when Antony and Cleopatra were defeated at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, the end was inevitable. Rather than be exhibited in a Roman triumph, Cleopatra famously died by suicide in 30 BCE, traditionally said to have used a poisonous snake, though modern scholars debate this. With her death, the Ptolemaic kingdom ended and Egypt became a province of the Roman Empire. Egypt has fallen before, a priest at Philae Temple reflects as news of Cleopatra's death spreads. Hyksos, Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, all have ruled us, yet Egypt remains. Our gods remain. So long as the Nile flows, Egypt cannot truly die. He was partly right. Roman rule would last for centuries, followed by Byzantine, Arab, Ottoman, and eventually British control. Political independence was lost, but Egyptian culture proved remarkably resilient, adapting and evolving while maintaining continuity with its ancient roots. The ancient temples continued to function well into the Roman period. Hieroglyphic writing, already becoming specialized during the Ptolemaic era, continued to be used for religious texts until the 5th century CE. Traditional Egyptian religion gradually gave way to Christianity and later Islam. But elements of ancient beliefs were sometimes incorporated into these newer faiths. As the sun sets on Ptolemaic Egypt, bringing an end to the last native-style kingdom and the beginning of direct foreign rule, it's worth reflecting on the extraordinary longevity of ancient Egyptian civilization, from its beginnings around 3100 BCE to Cleopatra's death in 30 BCE. Egypt maintained cultural continuity for over 3,000 years, a span of time difficult for modern minds to truly comprehend. For comparison, we're closer in time to Cleopatra than she was to the builders of the Great Pyramid. When Cleopatra visited the pyramids at Giza, they were already ancient monuments, older to her than medieval castles are to us. This incredible temporal depth is what makes ancient Egypt so fascinating as you lie in your comfortable modern bed surrounded by technologies that would seem magical to even the most sophisticated Alexandrian scholar. Remember that the Egyptians too were innovators and adapters. They survived climate change, political collapse, foreign invasion, and cultural transformation, all while maintaining core elements of their identity. Unlike us, cushioned by our modern comforts, they lived with constant awareness of how quickly prosperity could turn to famine, health to sickness, order to chaos. Perhaps this awareness drove their obsession with permanence, their massive stone monuments, their elaborate preparations for the afterlife. In a world where so much could change so quickly, they sought to create something that would truly last forever. And in a way, they succeeded, not through mummification or pyramid building, but through the power of their ideas and symbols, which continue to captivate us thousands of years later. As your mind drifts towards sleep carried along the current of ancient history, remember that in some small way, you're helping to keep ancient Egypt alive in human memory, just as they always hoped to be remembered for eternity. The year is 30 BCE. Roman troops march through Alexandria's streets while locals watch with a mixture of resignation and curiosity. Egypt has fallen to Rome, and the new ruler, Octavian, soon to be called Augustus, has some immediate practical concerns. "Take me to the royal treasury," he orders his officers as they enter the Ptolemaic palace, "and find Cleopatra's son. He cannot be allowed to live." Caesarion, the teenage son of Cleopatra and Julius Caesar, is quickly tracked down and executed. Egypt, with its vast grain supplies and incredible wealth, is too valuable to risk any potential figurehead for rebellion. But Octavian is smart enough to understand that Egypt isn't just another conquest. The Egyptians will never accept direct Roman rule, a local advisor tells him. For thousands of years they've been governed by living gods, the pharaohs. Their entire society is built around this concept. Octavian nods, thinking, then Rome will respect their traditions to a point. I will be their pharaoh, though I'll never use that title in Rome. Egypt will be my personal province, not the Senate's. This pragmatic approach set the pattern for Roman rule in Egypt. Officially, Egypt became the personal property of the emperor, governed by a prefect appointed directly by him. No Roman senator was even allowed to visit Egypt without imperial permission. It was simply too rich and strategically important to risk becoming a power base for potential rivals. Let's visit Alexandria in the early Roman period, around 10 CE. The city remains one of the ancient world's great metropolitan centres, though its character is changing. Roman soldiers and officials now walk the streets alongside Greeks and Egyptians. The Romans are much like the Ptolemies in some ways. An Alexandrian merchant explains as he shows you around the city. They maintain Greek as the administrative language. They respect local customs up to a point, but make no mistake, they're here to extract wealth. For ordinary Egyptians, especially those in rural areas, the transition to Roman rule meant a heavier tax burden. The Romans implemented a more efficient and less forgiving system of taxation and census taking. Each person had to register for the census every 14 years and could not leave their home village without permission. The tax collectors know exactly what I own, down to the last chicken, grumbles a farmer in the Fayum region. They even count the date palms separately from other trees, taxing each one differently, and gods help you if you try to hide anything. This rigorous administration made Egypt Rome's richest province, providing tax revenues that reportedly accounted for up to a third of the entire imperial budget. Most importantly, Egypt became Rome's breadbasket, exporting massive quantities of grain to feed the capital's growing population. At the harbour, you'll see hundreds of ships being loaded with grain bound for Rome, the Alexandrian merchant tells you. The emperor promises the Roman mob bread and circuses. Well, we provide the bread. Alexandria remains the cultural capital of the Eastern Mediterranean, with its famous library and museum, actually a research institute continuing to attract scholars, though with diminished prestige under Roman oversight. The city is now divided into three main communities: Greeks, Egyptians, and Jews, with Romans as the ruling elite. While Alexandria becomes increasingly cosmopolitan, traditional Egyptian culture persists more strongly in the countryside and in Upper Egypt. The Romans, like the Ptolemies before them, understand the importance of maintaining Egyptian religious traditions. Let's visit the Temple of Dendara during the reign of Emperor Tiberius, 14 to 37 CE. The walls display relief carvings of Roman emperors depicted as traditional pharaohs making offerings to Egyptian gods. The accompanying hieroglyphic inscriptions give the emperors full Egyptian royal titulary, calling them Son of Ra and Beloved of Ptah. The emperor will never visit this temple, a priest explains, but his name and image must be shown performing the proper rituals. This maintains Ma'at, cosmic order, regardless of who physically sits on Egypt's throne. The Romans were practical imperialists. They saw no contradiction in the emperor being portrayed as a pharaoh in Egypt while being a princeps, first citizen, in Rome. Different cultural contexts required different presentations of imperial authority. Egyptian religion continued to evolve during the Roman period with increasing syncretism, the blending of deities and religious practices from different traditions. Isis, already popular throughout the Mediterranean world during the Ptolemaic period, became even more widely worshipped, with temples dedicated to her as far away as Britain. Isis encompasses all goddesses, explains a priestess at her temple in Alexandria. The Greeks call her Demeter or Aphrodite. The Romans connect her to Ceres or Venus, but we know her true nature as Isis, the throne, the mother of Horus, the one who reassembled Osiris. Another Egyptian deity who gained international popularity was Serapis, a hybrid god created during the Ptolemaic period by combining aspects of Osiris and Apis. With his Greek-style appearance but Egyptian conceptual roots, Serapis became the perfect deity for a multicultural empire. The worship of animals remained distinctively Egyptian and continued well into the Roman period. At sites like Tuna el Gabel, vast catacombs contained millions of mummified ibises, baboons, falcons, and other sacred animals. The industry around producing these animal mummies employed thousands. Each ibis is a prayer made physical, a priest at Tuna el Gabel explains, showing rows upon rows of mummified birds in pottery jars. The worshipper pays for the bird to be mummified and dedicated to Thoth. The more one offers, the more favourable the god becomes. Modern analysis of these animal mummies reveals that demand sometimes exceeded supply, with many ibis mummies containing only a feather or eggshell rather than a complete bird, an ancient version of religious fraud. While traditional religion continued, social and legal divisions hardened under Roman rule. The population was officially classified into Romans, the privileged few, Greeks, citizens of the Greek cities like Alexandria, and Egyptians, everyone else. Each group lived under different legal systems and paid different tax rates. As an Egyptian, I pay the full poll tax, explains a craftsman from a village in Middle Egypt. Greeks pay less, Romans pay nothing. If I could somehow become a Greek citizen, my family's life would be much easier. This rigid social stratification created resentment that occasionally erupted into violence, particularly in Alexandria, where the Greek, Jewish and Egyptian communities frequently clashed. Major riots occurred in 38, 66 and 115-117 CE, the last of which decimated Alexandria's Jewish community. Despite these tensions, daily life for most Egyptians continued much as it had for centuries. Farmers still worked fields using methods recognizable to their ancestors from 1,000 years earlier. Village life still centered around local temples and traditional festivals. Let's visit a rural village in the Fayum region around 150 CE. The houses are simple mud brick structures. Women grind grain using stone querns. Men work in the fields using wooden ploughs pulled by oxen. Children help with chores and play with simple toys made of clay or wood. My great-grandfather worked this same field, a farmer tells you, as he diverts water from an irrigation canal to his crops. His father before him, and his father before that. The faces of those who rule may change, but the Nile, the soil, and our labour remain constant. This continuity is reflected in the material culture revealed by archaeology. Pottery forms, farming tools, and household items show remarkable consistency over centuries, even millennia. Innovation happened, but slowly and incrementally. Meanwhile, subtle changes were occurring. By the 2nd century CE, hieroglyphic writing was becoming increasingly specialized, used primarily for formal religious inscriptions by a dwindling number of trained scribes. Demotic, a cursive script derived from hieroglyphics, was used for everyday Egyptian writing, while Greek remained the language of administration. A papyrus from this period illustrates the linguistic complexity of Roman Egypt. It contains a legal contract written in Greek with signatures in Greek from the officials, in Demotic from the Egyptian parties involved, and in Latin from the presiding Roman magistrate, 3 writing systems in a single document. My son learns Greek at school, says an Egyptian farmer with pride. He helps me read tax notices and write appeals when the assessments are too high. But at the temple, he studies the ancient writing to become a priest someday. The 3rd century CE brought increasing instability to the Roman Empire, with Egypt suffering accordingly. Political turmoil in Rome led to economic chaos. Currency was devalued, inflation soared, and tax demands increased to fund constant warfare. Climate change may have also reduced Nile flood levels, affecting agriculture. The coins they pay us with contain more copper than silver now, complains a merchant in Alexandria. Prices rise every month. People hoard grain instead of selling it. The prefect sends soldiers to requisition crops at spear point. During this turbulent time, a new religion was gaining converts: Christianity. Egypt became an early centre of Christian thought and practice, with Alexandria producing influential theologians and the surrounding desert becoming home to early monasticism. In the desert, away from worldly distractions, we find God, explains an early Christian hermit living in a small cave in the Wadi Natron. Others may join us, forming communities of prayer, but the solitude itself is a path to the divine. Christianity spread first in cities, particularly among Greek speakers, then gradually into rural areas where traditional Egyptian religion remained strongest. The new faith sometimes incorporated elements of older beliefs, particularly regarding the afterlife and the veneration of holy figures. "Look at how they depict their Christos," whispers a traditional priest watching a Christian funeral. "Arms outstretched like Osiris. Their saints receive prayers like our gods. They preserve bodies of holy men just as we preserve our sacred mummies. They've taken our ways and given them new names." By the 4th century CE, Christianity gained imperial support when Emperor Constantine legalized the religion, and later emperors made it the official faith of Rome. Traditional Egyptian temples began to lose state funding and faced increasing restrictions. The Temple of Philae, on an island in the Nile near Aswan, provides a poignant example of this transition. As one of the last functioning centres of the traditional Egyptian religion, it remained active even as Christianity became dominant elsewhere. "We maintain the ancient ways," a priest at Philae tells you around 390 CE. People still come from distant villages for oracles and healing. The goddess Isis has protected her shrine through many troubles. She will continue. His confidence was misplaced. In 535 CE, Emperor Justinian ordered the temple closed. Its walls were later repurposed for Christian worship, with Egyptian religious imagery plastered over and crosses carved into ancient relief sculptures. The final known hieroglyphic inscription dates to 394 CE, carved at Philae. The final demotic text was written in 452 CE. With that, the ancient Egyptian writing system that had endured for nearly 4,000 years fell silent, its secrets eventually lost until the Rosetta Stone's decipherment in the 19th century. But even as traditional writing and formal religion faded, elements of ancient Egyptian culture persisted in the Coptic Christian tradition that emerged. The Coptic language, the final stage of ancient Egyptian, written using Greek letters with a few additional signs, preserved the indigenous tongue of Egypt into the Middle Ages. Coptic Christianity maintained distinctively Egyptian characteristics, including artistic styles reminiscent of pharaonic art, architectural elements from ancient temples, and even some religious practices with ancient roots, such as the veneration of saints, which paralleled the earlier cult of local gods. "We are Christians now," an Egyptian monk tells you in a Coptic monastery around 500 CE, "but we remain Egyptians. Our fathers built the pyramids and carved the sphinxes. That heritage flows in our blood even as we pray to Christ." This cultural persistence is perhaps ancient Egypt's most remarkable achievement. Few civilizations have maintained such continuity across millennia or left such an indelible mark on human imagination. The monuments, art, and concepts of ancient Egypt continue to captivate us today, fulfilling the deepest wish of the ancient Egyptians themselves, to be remembered forever. As twilight falls on ancient Egyptian civilization, it's worth reflecting on what made it so extraordinary. It wasn't just the pyramids, the mummies, or the elaborate mythology. Impressive as these are, it was the Egyptians' unique relationship with permanence and change, their ability to absorb foreign influences while maintaining core cultural elements, and their profound belief in a cosmic order that could be maintained through proper human action. They faced the same challenges we do: climate change, resource pressures, political instability, technological disruption, yet created a society that endured longer than any other in human history. Their story isn't just about pharaohs and monuments, but about how ordinary people found meaning and created beauty in a world full of uncertainty. Unlike your modern bed, with its manufactured frame and machine-woven sheets, the ancient Egyptians slept on beds made by hand, often simple wooden frames with reed mats or linen cord webbing. But like you, they dreamed, worried about tomorrow, found joy in small pleasures, and hoped to be remembered when they were gone. In your comfortable modern home, secure from the elements and filled with conveniences the Egyptians couldn't imagine, you share something profound with them: the human desire to understand our place in the cosmos and to leave something of ourselves behind when we're gone. In learning their story, you help fulfill their deepest wish: to be remembered, to achieve a kind of immortality through memory. The last hieroglyphic inscription was carved at the Temple of Philae in 394 CE. The final Demotic text was written in 452 CE. For the first time in nearly 4,000 years, the ancient Egyptian writing system fell silent. The knowledge needed to read these scripts gradually faded until no one remained who could decipher them. Egypt itself continued, of course. The land remained, the Nile still flooded, people still farmed the black soil, but the direct connection to the civilization of the pharaohs was broken. The great temples became quarries for building materials, sand slowly buried monuments. Tombs were looted, then forgotten. Strange to think, muses an Arab merchant travelling through Egypt around 850 CE, gazing up at the weathered face of the Great Sphinx, that no one remembers who built this or why. It simply exists, like a mountain or the sea. For over 1,000 years, the ancient Egyptian language and writing remained unreadable. The magnificent architecture still stood, the pyramids, temples, and tombs too massive to disappear entirely, but their meaning was lost. Travellers from medieval Europe and the Islamic world marvelled at these structures, but could only guess at their purpose. The Renaissance brought renewed European interest in Egypt, but still without understanding. In the 1600s, a German Jesuit named Athanasius Kircher attempted to translate hieroglyphics, believing they were purely symbolic rather than phonetic. He got almost everything wrong, yet his work kept interest in ancient Egypt alive. These symbols must contain great wisdom, Kircher wrote, incorrectly translating a standard royal inscription as a mystical, philosophical text. The ancient priests encoded their secret knowledge in these sacred signs. This misunderstanding of Egypt as a land of mystery and hidden wisdom took root in European imagination. Secretly, though, real Egyptian wisdom had been influencing Western culture all along, through Greek writers like Herodotus, Plutarch, and Diodorus Siculus, whose accounts of Egypt, however flawed, preserved something of its greatness. Egypt's architectural legacy also survived in the obelisks that Roman emperors had transported to their capital. Several still stand in Rome today, inscriptions unreadable, but the imperial power they represented still evident. The real turning point came with Napoleon Bonaparte's invasion of Egypt in 1798. Along with his troops, Napoleon brought over 150 civilian scholars, scientists, engineers, artists, and linguists to study every aspect of Egypt, ancient and modern. Record everything, Napoleon instructed the scholars. Every monument, every inscription, every plant and animal. Egypt is a treasure house of knowledge, and we shall unlock it. This expedition produced the monumental Description de l'Egypte, a series of volumes documenting Egyptian antiquities with unprecedented accuracy. More importantly, in 1799, French soldiers discovered a large stone near the town of Rosetta with an inscription in 3 scripts: hieroglyphic, Demotic, and ancient Greek. This Rosetta Stone would eventually provide the key to deciphering hieroglyphics, though the breakthrough didn't come immediately. It took years of work by scholars, particularly the Englishman Thomas Young and the Frenchman Jean-François Champollion. Eureka, Champollion allegedly exclaimed in 1822, rushing into his brother's office. "I've got it." After collapsing from exhaustion, he spent the next 5 days bedridden, but he had cracked the code. Hieroglyphics weren't purely symbolic. They represented sounds, just like our alphabet, though with additional complexities. With this discovery, ancient Egypt began to speak again after a silence of nearly 1,400 years. Suddenly, temple walls, papyri, and tomb inscriptions could be read, revealing not mystical secrets, but the practical details of government, religion, and daily life. They weren't writing magical spells on their tombs, a 19th century Egyptologist explains to a disappointed visitor. This section is a standard offering formula. This lists the owner's titles. Here are the names of his wife and children. It's administrative, not mystical. The 19th and 20th centuries saw an explosion of Egyptological research, with archaeological expeditions uncovering new sites and artifacts. Howard Carter's discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 captured worldwide imagination. The treasures found inside, including the famous golden mask, toured the globe, creating an Egyptomania that influenced everything from fashion to furniture design. As archaeological techniques improved, excavations shifted focus from spectacular royal tombs to humble settlements, helping us understand the lives of ordinary ancient Egyptians. Each new discovery added details to our understanding, though much remains unknown. "We used to think the pyramids were built by slaves," explains a modern Egyptologist at Giza. "Now we know they were constructed by paid labourers, many of whom worked seasonally during the Nile flood when they couldn't farm. We found their village, their tools, even their graffiti joking about the king." Today, millions of tourists visit Egypt annually to marvel at its ancient monuments. Countless books, documentaries, and university courses examine every aspect of Egyptian civilization. Museums around the world display Egyptian artifacts, from monumental statues to humble household items. But why does ancient Egypt continue to captivate us? What made this particular civilization so exceptional? Part of the answer lies in its incredible longevity. Ancient Egyptian culture maintained remarkable continuity from around 3100 BCE to at least 394 CE, over 3,500 years. For comparison, the United States has existed for less than 250 years. The entire history of ancient Greece, from its earliest beginnings to Roman conquest, spans about 1,500 years. This extraordinary continuity stemmed from several factors. Egypt's geography provided natural protection, with deserts to the east and west and the Mediterranean to the north. The Nile's predictable annual flood created agricultural stability unknown in other ancient societies that depended on rainfall, and the Egyptians developed cultural and religious systems that emphasized stability and resisted rapid change. Ma'at, the concept of cosmic order, balance and justice, was central to Egyptian thought, explains an anthropologist studying ancient belief systems. They saw change as potentially disruptive to this divine order. Their ideal wasn't progress, but the maintenance of what they believed was the perfect arrangement established at creation. This doesn't mean Egyptian society never changed, of course. We've seen how it evolved through periods of unity and fragmentation, native rule and foreign occupation, isolation and international engagement. But compared to many ancient societies, Egypt maintained remarkable cultural consistency over millennia. Another factor in Egypt's enduring appeal is the sheer physical presence of its monuments. The pyramids at Giza remain the only surviving wonder of the ancient world. They've stood for over 4,500 years, their massive stone blocks defying time, while civilizations rose and fell around them. I've worked at archaeological sites worldwide, confides a veteran excavator, but nothing compares to that moment each morning when the sun hits the Great Pyramid. For a few minutes it glows golden, just as it did when it was new, and you feel connected across thousands of years to the people who built it. This tangible connection to the ancient past gives Egypt a unique place in our imagination. We can walk through the same temples where priests performed rituals 3,000 years ago, see the faces of people who died before Rome was founded, and read their actual words inscribed in stone. Egypt's obsession with death and the afterlife also contributes to its fascination. Every human culture grapples with mortality, but few have left such elaborate physical evidence of their beliefs. Egyptian mummies, tomb paintings, and funerary texts offer an unusually detailed view of how one ancient society confronted death's universal challenge. They weren't morbid, explains a museum curator specializing in Egyptian funerary customs. Just the opposite. They loved life so much they wanted it to continue forever. Everything in their tombs, from food to furniture, games to cosmetics, was meant to ensure they could enjoy the afterlife just as they had enjoyed this one. Perhaps most important is Egypt's role as a cultural foundation. Along with Mesopotamia, it represents one of humanity's earliest experiments with civilization itself, the development of writing, monumental architecture, organized religion, centralized government, and large-scale social organization. Egypt influenced the ancient Israelites. Abraham, Moses and Joseph all supposedly spent time there. The Nubians and other African cultures, the Greeks, who considered Egypt the source of wisdom and learning, and through them the Romans and later European societies. Christianity incorporated elements of Egyptian religion, particularly regarding the afterlife. Islamic scholars preserved and transmitted ancient knowledge, including works about Egypt. Even today, Egyptian symbols and concepts permeate our world, often without our noticing. The pyramid appears on the American dollar bill. Obelisks stand in Washington, D.C., London, and Paris. Our 12-month calendar derives partly from the Egyptian system. Some traditional wedding rings are designed after the Egyptian Ankh symbol of life. Next time you're in a cemetery, look at the tombstones, suggests an architectural historian. Those obelisks, Egyptian, the pyramid-shaped monuments, Egyptian. Even the angel sculptures have predecessors in Egyptian winged protective deities. Our ways of memorializing death owe much to ancient Egypt. Egypt's influence extends to literature, film, and popular culture. From Elizabeth Taylor's Cleopatra to the Mummy franchise, from Agatha Christie's Death on the Nile to countless documentaries, Egypt provides an endless source of storytelling inspiration. Its symbols and imagery appear in everything from tarot cards to tattoos, heavy metal album covers to luxury brand logos. More subtly, Egyptian thought continues to influence how we understand the relationship between humanity and cosmic order. The Egyptian concept that human actions affect universal harmony has parallels in modern environmental ethics. Their integration of religious belief with practical governance reflects tensions still present in many societies today. The Egyptians believed you couldn't separate cosmic order from social justice, explains a scholar of ancient ethics. To them, mistreating people or damaging the natural world wasn't just morally wrong, it threatened the entire universal balance. That's not so different from modern ecological thinking. As night deepens and our journey through ancient Egyptian history comes to a close, it's worth reflecting on what this vanished civilization might teach us. The Egyptians faced challenges we still struggle with, maintaining social cohesion, adapting to environmental change, balancing tradition with innovation, finding meaning in a world filled with uncertainty. They responded with remarkable creativity, building a society that endured longer than any other in human history. Their art still moves us with its elegant simplicity. Their architecture still inspires awe. Their writing still speaks to us across millennia, reminding us of our shared humanity. We think technology makes us different from ancient people. An elderly Egyptian tour guide tells a group at Saqqara, his face weathered from decades in the desert sun. But look at what's written on this tomb from 4,000 years ago. I was kind to my family. I helped those in need. I spoke truth. I tried to leave a good name. Are your hopes so different? He's right, of course. For all their exotic beliefs and distant past, the ancient Egyptians were people like us, hoping for happiness in this life and some form of continuation beyond it, seeking security for their families, trying to create meaning through work and relationships. Their story reminds us of both human resilience and fragility. They built monuments meant to last forever, yet their civilization eventually faded. They preserved their dead with elaborate care, yet most of their mummies were ultimately destroyed or displayed in museums far from their homeland. They developed writing to make their words permanent, yet their language became unreadable for over a millennium. Despite these failures, they achieved a kind of immortality. Not the literal, physical kind they sought, but the immortality of cultural memory and influence. We still speak their names, visit their monuments, study their language, and ponder their beliefs. In this way, they continue to live, fulfilling the deepest wish expressed in countless Egyptian texts. May my name endure upon the earth. As you rest in your modern bed, surrounded by comforts the Egyptians could never have imagined, remember that you're connected to them through the unbroken thread of human experience. Their questions remain our questions. How should we live? What endures after death? How can we create something meaningful that outlasts us? The pyramids, rising from the desert sand, answer with silent certainty. By building well, by honouring what matters most, by understanding that nothing material truly lasts forever. Yet through our creations and the memories we leave, something of us may endure. Close your eyes now and imagine standing before the great Sphinx at sunset, the ancient stone warming your hand as you touch its weathered paw. For a moment, time dissolves. You're connected to everyone who ever stood there, from pharaohs and priests to Napoleon's scholars, from medieval travellers to future visitors not yet born. Like the gentle current of the Nile flowing eternally northward, human consciousness continues, carrying something of Egypt with it always. Let yourself drift now into peaceful sleep, perhaps to dream of golden tombs, desert sands, and a civilization that reached for eternity and in some small way found it.